Good evening. My name is Pathikrit Pine, and I welcome you all for another episode of Amrit Kal Ki Aur series on behalf of Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. Today, we have somebody who is an extremely well known person in the area of public policy, and his expertise has often been taken as inputs by the government of India in the past. I welcome Mr. Kishore Desai, who is extremely well known in the realm of industry perspective of economic policies. Sir, thank you so much for joining once again for our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you
My
so much,
first
Pathikrit.
question,
Yeah.
my first question to you will be a little generic in the sense
Yeah.
that nowadays we see that nowadays when it comes to policy announcements or policy making, it is no more something that is done only during the budget. Throughout the year, we see critical decisions are taken. So, from that context, even now, how important do you think that the budget that is presented by the Honorable Finance Minister of the Union Government every year is important?
I think Pathikrit, first of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. I'm sure that this is going to be a very interesting discussion for me. So I think you raised a very interesting point. See, if you see the practice of budget, actually it emanates from the Constitution of India. So there is an Article 112 in the Constitution of India which says that the incumbent government has to lay down an annual financial statement in the Parliament. The Constitution actually uses the word annual financial statement. What effectively it means that to run, a government, uh, the government has to kind of state the kind of the extent and the quantum of revenues that it is expected to earn, and how it is going to spend those financial resources, because it's taxpayers' money, it's public money, so it needs an explicit approval of the parliament to spend. So that is the overall objective. So if you see the constitutional requirement is, it is essentially the money that I am earning and how do I propose to spend that money. That is the broader definition or a requirement from the constitution perspective. Now, over a period of time, the practice of budget actually started becoming more of a of a platform to announce lofty policy measures and grand announcement, so on and so forth. So it took a lot of political color where the government and ministers used budget as a platform to communicate or to please some of their constituencies. Technically speaking, it is not needed. Policy announcement is very different from the budget, and as you rightly mentioned, policy is a plan of the government which essentially the government lays out as to what are the important priorities for of economic development. So basis the priorities of the government, it will lay down policies. So those policies need not be announced only in budgets, throughout there at any point of time. And we have seen examples, right? For example, COVID, and you rightly mentioned this government is not limiting announcement of policies only to the budget. COVID, we have seen the government, as and when the situation arose, government came, announced a policy. If the policy did not work properly, government announced several tweaks to the policy. I also remember important financial policy announcements like taxation changes. I don't know if you recall, but actually the reduction of corporate taxes, which was kind of taken as one of the biggest reform initiatives of the government, which wherein it brought down the corporate tax significantly, was actually announced out of budget. So to answer your question, budget should not be seen. Actually, budget should not be a platform to announce grand policy measures. It should be more a platform to kind of communicate how are you going to allocate the financial resources. Policies should be announced, could be announced. It could be announced in the budget, but it should ideally be announced after a lot of debate with stakeholders, etc. Once the policy is announced, the budget should kind of ensure that the policy measures that have been announced by the government are adequately funded. So the budget should focus itself on financial resource allocation for implementing the administrative and the implementation costs of that particular policy or initiative of the government. So that's the kind of brief I would like to
Right.
state.
So this time, yes. Going to the next question, which is related to this time, because there was already an interim budget and a lot of these policy decisions were already announced. How do you see this budget in the month of July being different from the interim budget? Do you see that there are certain things which have been added, or it's like more of a continuity of the interim budget and most of the policy measures that were already announced that time?
Uh, Pathikrit, I would say both. See,
Yeah.
definitely there is a continuity. For example, the financial allocation. See, the government is same. The government that came back is the same. So, in fact, this is a very important point. I remember, after the elections when the current NDA government could not get majority on its own, there were a lot of speculations amongst a large section of stakeholders that will the government be able to continue on its bold reform path that it had taken. See, reforms are not just 1 year agenda. The government had rolled out a multi-year development program, and it needed to kind of continue investing and funding those development programs to ensure that those initiatives actually are fruitful, and they reach the saturation levels. So it takes time, given the size and the complexity of the country. So after the election results, I remember a lot of people kind of expected that perhaps the kind of reforms that the government had been doing, whether it will be able to do the same kind of reforms or not. Then after the election results, of course the government had to kind of depend on some of its allies. Not that it did not need them earlier, but because of the political issues, I think the dependence has slightly increased more on some of the larger allies. And now after the national elections, there are some important polls which are expected. Like Maharashtra, for example, is going to polls in few months. Then Haryana, Jharkhand, then Delhi. After some time, Bihar. So I think people were kind of expecting that perhaps a lot of fiscal space which is there, maybe a portion of that may not go towards reforms, towards the capital investment program of the government. Perhaps they will get diverted to doles, freebies, which is actually a popular trend now. There are a lot of states who are doing it, and I need not get into all of that. So there was an apprehension, I would say, but this budget did not kind of it had nothing of that sort, and in fact it continued. So in the sense, so there is a difference, and a difference from the expectations, and there is a continuity that kind of I think the message that the budget, overarching message, if you were to ask me, it gave the message that the government gave, that look, we have rolled out a multi-year development agenda, and we are going to adequately fund that development agenda. We are not going to abandon the reform agenda. In fact, probably we will kind of double down our efforts, and we will kind of ensure that the pace of reforms and the pace of implementation is expedited as we go forward. So I think this is the overarching message that at least I could take away from the budget, and in the
So
context in which the budget was presented.
So we
Yeah.
see a trend where some of the BJP ruled states might be doling out some of the freebies. If you look at the Maharashtra government budget this time, and probably also the Madhya Pradesh budget, but so the Ladli scheme was very popular in Madhya Pradesh. But when it comes to the central government, I think when it comes to issues of fiscal prudence, ensuring that India's ratings in the global arena does not get compromised, I think there's a balance they're trying to do in terms of the states might go ahead with certain kind of freebies, but the center will be much more proactive and pragmatic in terms of ensuring that the overall and long-term decision-making, long-term vision is not compromised. Do you agree to that?
Def- Definitely, definitely. I think not only me, in fact, in terms of fiscal prudence, I think this is this is a point where almost all the stakeholders agree. I see there is a wide consensus, near unanimity, in terms of overall fiscal prudence of the government. Even critics have to agree because the data speaks, right? So, for example, uh, like as analysts, as industry practitioners, if we were to analyze whether this company is profitable, it is financially healthy or not, we usually see certain metrics. right? For example, there is a ratio called debt service ratio, which essentially means whether the company has whatever debt the company has taken, can it service the debt liabilities through its cash flows or not? So there is that ratio that we look, and the usual profitability ratios. Likewise, for government, there are few macro indicators, primarily the revenue deficit and the fiscal deficit. These are the two large. There is a primary deficit also, but these are the two large, prominent macro indicators that kind of indicate the fiscal management of a particular government. Revenue deficit is nothing but if I am earning 100 rupee as revenue, there are a lot of expenditure that are termed as revenue expenditure of the government, which essentially means, the liabilities of the government. So there is a staff, so I have to pay salaries. There are pension liabilities, there are interest costs, subsidies. So those are, called as revenue expenditure. So revenue deficit means whether my revenues is able to meet my revenue expenditure or not. Otherwise, I'll have to borrow even to meet my committed liabilities. So if the revenue deficit is near zero, it means my revenue matches my revenue expenditure. Fiscal deficit is essentially, your total expenditure, the difference of total expenditure and revenue. Uh, Not all the expenditure is in the nature of revenue expenditure. There are some capital expenditure also. So fiscal deficit kind of, shows how the government is able to, or the level of borrowings that the government has to do to meet the overall expenditure, including the capex. So the lower the fiscal deficit, it is better, which means the government has enough money to even invest in capital initiatives. If you see the trends in 2014-15, I remember the fiscal deficit of the government. Um, uh, actually 2014-15 may be the wrong indicator. Let's take from COVID, for example, because COVID was an outlier. That kind of, it was a very different situation. It forced the government to spend and it could not earn. So I remember the fiscal deficit of government shot up significantly, and it reached to 9% levels around 2021, if I remember correctly. Right now in this budget, the government has, in the last 3 years only, within the last 3 years, from 9% of GDP, the government has now, brought down to 4.9% of the GDP. And the finance minister has said that from next year, which is the budget to be presented in February 2025, she will target a 4.5% GDP number, with an intent that going forward, the overall aim of the government will be to reduce the debt to GDP ratio of the government. It is a phenomenal achievement. See, cutting down, the fiscal deficit by 0.5%, by almost 50 percentage, without, most important point is without compromising on the quality of expenditure, is a phenomenal feat. So it does not happen just like that. Somebody had to really apply mind and serious effort to kind of cut off all unwanted wasteful expenditures and to use whatever limited financial resources that you have very judiciously. Another important point I would like to state is, this is very interesting point. Um, See, with every budget document, government also releases a very interesting document called, I think, handbook or summary of budget document. I don't remember the exact name of the document. In that document, I was seeing there is, in one of the pages they have made two pie charts. So one pie chart essentially shows where does a rupee come from. So basically, it kind of shows the percentage of contribution, different types of revenue generating, like how much percentage direct tax, how much percentage customs, how much percentage GST contribute to the overall revenue kitty of the government. Likewise, where does the rupee go? So what are the different broad heads of expenditure? And I was surprised to see that out of the total expenditure of the government, almost 70 to 75 percentage of expenditure is such that government has no control. It's simply into salaries, interests, pensions, so on and so forth. So basically, what I'm trying to say is it's only the 20 to 25 percentage expenditure which the government has control on. So despite such strong boundaries, limitations, and constraints, if you are able to judiciously use that limited, very small, so the size of the budget looks very large, 48 lakh crore. Oh, it's such a big. Headline numbers looks very large, that it's such a large amount of expenditure, you can easily manage things. But if you get down into nuances and details, the actual space to kind of manage all your deficit levels is very small. and which this government has done successfully. And I say that, I would say that this kind of indicates the astuteness, the prudent management of the limited fiscal resources.
So one question I have, which is probably not related directly to domestic finance, uh, I think there is an apprehension globally that there is going to be some geopolitical global financial reset is probably coming. There will be certain kind of chaos happening in Western Europe. There are things which are not very good in China. US has its own challenges, including debt and internal chaos. Do you think that the government is also ensuring that we are prepared for probably the next major disruption that may come? Conflicts. If you look at Middle East, the kind of situation that is there. If you look at South China Sea, especially Middle East, do you think the government is ensuring that we are not taken off guard? What happened during the COVID period and post-COVID period when there were challenges as a result of Ukraine-Russia conflict? Do you think government is trying to be conservative in terms of populism because it apprehends, like most, that there are certain major systemic disruptions globally that are about to come, which most people may not, the common people may not, understand or they may not appreciate, but the government, in spite of criticism, will have to keep in mind those things and take certain decisions. Do you think something like that is also there in the budget?
I, I would make 2 points. See, the fact that there are, okay, let's look at, for example, what is happening in India vis-a-vis what is happening globally. You rightly mentioned, right? There are a lot of, from the perspective of economy, global economic, the global economic condition is quite turbulent. China is under problem. I remember reading there was a statement from the new finance minister of UK, Britain. I think she said that the country is broke and broken. Europe in general is facing economic stress. US is actually fine. US is still, I would say, US is the only country which, amongst the developed countries, which is still fine. But besides US, I think broadly almost all the developed countries, including China, are facing economic stress. Wars are going on. Because of wars, I think there is in general disruption in the supply of fuel and energy. And in general, there is a lot of disruption in trade, right? So that is also fueling inflation. And, so compared to what's happening globally, let's look at India. Last year, we grew at 8.2% GDP. Not only last year, if you see the average growth rate since COVID, I'm not counting COVID because COVID was it's an exceptional year. Since COVID, consistently we have been growing at 8 plus average growth rates. Our foreign exchange reserves are at all-time high. We keep reading about it. Inflation high, yes, but now it is coming down, and it is now within that the tolerance band of the Reserve Bank, which is between 2% to 6%. It is now going down. This year, I am reading that monsoons are expected to be good. So perhaps if the rain gods are pleased, at least the rural economy, the agriculture side, and the food inflation, which is one of the biggest problems right now, could probably see a declining trend. The NPA levels of banks are at all-time low. We look at markets, etc. It's a reflection of how the private sector is performing, and the way Sensex and Nifty are performing. It's a reflection of how the larger industry is economically placed, financially placed in India. See, it is not by chance, right? The government has been taking careful, prudent measures over a period of time that has led to a strong financial and economic situation today. Now, why I kind of laid that context, because to the point that you said, if tomorrow there is a global economic uncertainty for whatever reasons, then the kind of buffer that this entire system has created will be used to counter, any economic, like COVID happened. We had some buffer, not so much. Now our buffers are much higher, I would say. So that is the first point. The second point, again relates to the fiscal deficit point that we are, we were discussing a while ago. See, the benefit of having a lower fiscal deficit, there are 2, 3 benefits. One, if your fiscal deficit is lower, it means that you are generating enough to actually fund your expenditure as well as your capital investment requirements. So if you're borrowing lesser, it means that you are using the borrowings very judiciously. You're not wasting unnecessary money. You're not using, okay, my fiscal deficit is low, so let me borrow and let me give a farm loan waiver. For example, I'm just naming a scheme which may not be that productive in the current context. I'm not misusing that, that expensive money to give out doles just to please a certain constituency. The second benefit of a lower fiscal deficit is that because government is borrowing in a limited manner, the capital flow in the country is limited. So if government is borrowing less, the additional capital is available for the private sector, which it can borrow. And because government is borrowing less, there is ample financial money that the private sector can use to invest on its own projects. And second, the interest rates also remain benign. Otherwise, if the money, the stock of money reduces, then the interest rate, there will be pressure on interest because then more number of people will be chasing less money. So, which is why, the financial sector is also quite healthy. Now, tomorrow, if an exigency comes, now because government is wisely, in Hindi we say jitne chadar hai utne hi pav pasar ho. So tomorrow if an exigency comes, there are enough firepower, enough weapons in government's armory that it can take counter cyclical measures because your fiscal deficit is in an acceptable range. You have enough avenues that tomorrow if you're needing to invest more to address the problem, then you can borrow like the government did for COVID, right? The fiscal deficit was low, so government could afford a 1 year spike, assuming that that spike kind of stabilizes in 1.5 2 years. However, if an exigency comes where the government has to maintain an investment for 5 6 years, then that's a very unique scenario. But for 1 to 2 years, enough firepower is available with the government, and that has happened because of years of like us, right? If we have to buy, the years of saving help us meet any exigencies, any unexpected costs. So exactly, I think like as in the case of individual, the deficit level and the overall fiscal situation of the government is reasonably robust, which gives it enough capacity to take any counter cyclical measure should there be any exigency because of whatever is happening globally.
No, thank you so much for that. So I think a lot of supply chain resilience have already been built and are being built as part of production linked incentive and many other things. I'll have three more questions, short ones. Number one, in terms of capital expenditure capex, we see 11 lakh crore, more than 11 lakh crore has been earmarked for that, and more than 1 lakh crore as part of defense budget will be acquired from domestic defense production companies. So overall, it's like 12 lakh crore, and as part of 48 lakh crore budget, almost 25%, which you rightly mentioned, that there is a room for maneuver 25%, which was you were spot on. So I think yes, capital expenditure wise, I think the government has done a lot. Two critical issues. One was the issue of job, and I remember last year there was an article by on Larsen and Toubro, and Larsen and Toubro stated that they have a $50 billion backlog in their balance sheet, and they want to hire 30 to 35,000 people, but they don't find the right kind of people. So the job issue is actually a problem with skill. Of course, a bit of mentality and reluctance to be on the field also, because I have myself witnessed there's a problem with this generation, with no due with due respect to them, that they are not very comfortable to go to the field or to go to the workshop. In that context, I think that 1 crore internship and to train 4 crore people, I think that's a very interesting step forward in terms of bridging the gap between what the industry wants and what the output from the universities we have. I think it's a very visionary thing. How do you look at it?
So see, Pathikrit, I agree. There are 2 3 important points in that initiative. I think the first point is that the government acknowledged that we need to create jobs. Number one, how can you create jobs? See, if tomorrow, today, if the government is giving a fiscal incentive, it does not mean that the company, just because it is paying some portion of either salary or EPFO contribution, an industry will hire. But what the government is doing is that, look, we acknowledge that we need to create a nudge or incentivize private sector to create jobs, and we acknowledge that it is a very large, it is a very high important priority from the overall economic, development perspective. So I think the first point is there is a clear acknowledgement that we need to create more jobs, and see, there are being government, simplest thing would be to hire itself, right? But I mean, how many people you can hire? So then there is another agent, which is the private sector. You can't force private sector to hire. So I think this is a very creative way to kind of nudge the private sector to hire. And if you see the 5 schemes that that the government launched, uh, I think they are very they're very thought through. So not only providing fiscal support to the private sector to hire, but they're also creating incentives to skill, that you mentioned. I'll give you one example. The company that I work for, see, the manufacturing sector and the economic sector is also changing very fast. For example, let's pick up one simple point. Let's say mobility. See, India, and we are seeing because of electric vehicles, currently, if you see, the electric vehicles is becoming an important segment. Electric cars is becoming an important segment of the overall transport mobility. But this is relatively a newer product, a newer technology for India. Not many electric cars you can see in India. So now, if we as an industry, if we have to invest and set up manufacturing facilities, set up service facilities for electric cars, we don't have ready talent. So, which is why skilling is very important. There are opportunities. Industry is willing to invest because there is demand. Government is also incentivizing from the demand side. There are taxation subsidies, etc. So customers are also willing to buy. Industry is also willing to invest. But we need people. The industry needs people, and not many people. Because the industry itself is new. We don't have that. So skilling needs to be there. So that skill from IC, the normal petrol and diesel engine, to electric vehicle. This training needs to be there. That's the first point. Second, and newer energy initiatives like hydrogen, green hydrogen, etc. are coming. Not many people know how does the overall value chain and manufacturing ecosystem of hydrogen works, electrolyzers, etc. So, the skilling is a very important. So if you see the two last, the fourth and fifth initiative that the finance minister announced in the government talked about skilling. So how do we incentivize and how do we improve skilling? And it does not, it's not a prescriptive. It says that, look, industry, you know better what kind of skill gaps you need. I'll give you financial incentives. I'll nudge you. You please decide what kind of skilling you need, and you invest in your skilling requirements. I will ensure that you get some financial support. So industry decides what kind of skilling it needs. People come, government gives financial support. So it's kind of a very nice arrangement. Now, whether it works or not, it may not really work right from day one, but it's a 5-year initiative. It will take some time. I would say a beginning has been made. A very thoughtful beginning has been made, from skilling till incentivization of addition of employment. As and when we go, I am sure industry will kind of experiment with it. Government will get feedback. If there are some tweaks need to be done, those tweaks will be made. But adequate financial provision has been made. So 2 lakh crores, is a very large, sizable amount. It's not a token. Ki, chalo kuch, jobs is a problem. Chalo, we'll give something. 2 lakh crores is a very sizable provision that has been made. So given the, I would say, just to conclude, I would say it's a very thoughtful start. And I'm pretty sure that once the government has identified this as a problem, it's a very innovative measure. It may not work as it is, but I'm pretty sure that government will be open to feedback and it will keep tweaking these initiatives as we go.
Right. So, you're absolutely right. I just want to add one thing, that in this era of industrial automation and artificial intelligence, the quantum of jobs that will be created in organized industry may also come down. So, from that perspective, should we only look for jobs, or is it that the government over the last 10 years have taken an initiative, whether it is the Mudra Yojana or other related schemes? So in the last, say, 3-4 years, RBI says 8 crore jobs have been created, and also the government report says that in the last, say, 9 years, 8 crore people have taken Mudra loan to start their own business, and the Mudra Yojana maximum amount has been increased from 10 lakh to 20 lakh. So do you think we should only look at from the perspective of jobs, or more on a larger paradigm in terms of livelihood creation? For example, a micro enterprise may employ somebody, but he may not give him EPFO. He will not be registered under EPFO, but he is getting a livelihood. He might end up getting 10,000, 12,000 rupees a month. So, I mean, is there some kind of a gap in terms of how we define as to whether somebody is, productively engaged, remuneratively engaged or not? I mean, this is not a budget issue. I'm saying that on a larger context. Just wanted to, just wanted you to educate me on this.
See, the way it's not a, it's not a either or problem, I would say, Pathikrit. It's A and B. It's both. So, for example, you rightly mentioned, right? There is a Mudra Yojana. So, on one hand, there are Startup India, Stand Up India related schemes. So, on one hand, government is wanting, and and there is a stated policy objective intent that we want people to start up on their own, and we will provide whatever incentives we can. So, be it through Mudra Yojana, there is that this scheme which Swanidhi, or I can't exactly remember, through, yeah. So through that, I think all the street vendors also are getting, financial packages, or some basic, debt from a loan from the government, which helps them to kind of continue their. So on one hand, there are, programs and initiatives to promote people towards self-employment. But at the same time, corporates, whatever level of automation, digitization you say, there will always be industries which will employ people. You can't replace people. I agree. The intensity of employment will come down. That I agree. Perhaps an industry before automation may have needed maybe 100 people. After automation, maybe it will need, but it won't be needing zero. It will need possibly less. So government is saying, okay, fine. If the industry is now needing, instead of 100 people, if the industry is now needing, let's say, 40 people, I still need to do something about those 60. So maybe perhaps those 60 could either get some skill which can kind of help them get another job, or they can avail of Mudra Yojana. So, it's not, government is not a MyBap that, it will have to ensure protection of every individual. It is a facilitator. It is an enabler. It is providing options for everyone. So if I want to be an entrepreneur, I can avail Mudra loan. But if I want to work and I need some support in skilling, there is a skilling program. So I think it is tackling that. So your point of livelihood creation is perfect. It has to be looked at because things are changing dynamically, and we have surplus labor force, so to speak. So we have to, otherwise, situation will be, there will be social unrest. So we have to look at every type of constituency. So there are multiple schemes which are kind of, if you look at the overall impact, in a way, what you alluded to, I think it kind of addresses all those points. Multiple programs added together, I would say, kind of, address the livelihood issue.
So I think the government also on its part by 12 lakh crore capital expenditure, along with the private sector, which is doing capex quite a bit, is also nudging that, there are enough scope for the private sector to actually invest, expand, and then create jobs. Of course, you are right that the quantum may come down, but will not get down to zero. Absolutely true. My last question, sir, comes to the issue of income tax, which is always a controversial thing, and it's very difficult for any incumbent government to take a decision which will make everyone happy, even while keeping the fiscal deficit within limits. So the government has decided there will be some kind of a review of the income tax. Some kind of a decision have been taken. What do you think can a government do in a country where only, say, 2, 3, 4 crore people, less than 4 crore people actually pay taxes? And how should we ensure that, while everyone else might be happy and getting something, that the middle class does not get, a little upset beyond a point? Of course, the government is doing its best, because I think this entire internship program is primarily for the middle class. I think so, because The rich actually join their own businesses. The socio-economically who are from the lower strata, no disrespect to them, but they earn their own livelihood. It is primarily the middle class which looks for jobs, and the middle class which has a skill problem. So it is addressing, but every year there would be certain expectations. So how do you think the government would address this issue of maintaining fiscal prudence and at the same time ensuring that the bulk of the taxpayers in the income tax arena are kept happy at the same time? It's not easy, but I'm just asking. It cannot have a straight answer, but I'm just asking your viewpoint on it.
It is I would say in fact you raised a very interesting and very important point actually. I'm thinking of writing a piece on it. It's a bit of an emotive issue also. See, actually, I let me I've collected some information for the piece that I was wanting to write. I'll tell you some very interesting points. Okay. So see, middle class. Let's look at salaried class. As you rightly mentioned, many of the development initiatives of the government are not targeted towards salaried class. For example, the various DBT related initiatives, Ujjwala related initiative, or Pradhan Mantri, the Kisan scheme. Most of the initiatives, except perhaps Mudra Yojana, are not targeted towards the salaried class. I'm using middle class and salaried class interchangeably. So mostly the salaried classes will be kind of in a way it will continue to be dependent on salaried income for meeting its livelihood requirements. Now, what has happened is over a period of time, the taxation slabs have not changed much. The kind of incentives that are provided, direct support may not have happened, but indirectly, because you're investing in capital expenditure, it is an indirect flow. Companies are, getting money from the government. Therefore, they are hiring, and therefore that money flow is, the investment in capital expenditure leads to an economic multiplier. That's how it kind of, trickles down to salaried class. Now, because over a period of time the taxation slabs have not changed, there's a bit of a, I would say, discontent, and you can read about it. I mean, there are a lot of social media posts. It says that salaried class is a bit unhappy, because things have not changed much. Now, if you see the figures, I was looking at some of the, so CBDT, the Central Board of Direct Taxes, they release data related to income tax filings, income tax returns. It's very interesting. I just want to tell you, about that. Just give me 1 minute. See, I have the data in assessment year 2023-24 last year. There were about 7.6 crore income tax, returns filed. 7.6 crore. Now, out of that, 63% of the total people who filed paid zero taxes. 27% of the people who filed paid less than 1.5%, 1.5 lakh taxes. Net, 90% of the tax filers paid almost just 10% of the total taxes collected. 90% of the people just paid 10%. So the balance 10% people are actually paying, 90% of the personal taxes. Now, personal taxes as a share has actually, if you see a few years back, corporate taxes as a share of total taxation was higher, always higher than personal tax. But now the situation has changed. Now personal tax is higher, and corporate tax collections are lower than personal tax collection. So things are slightly moving. So we are now moving towards a situation where personal tax collections are becoming higher than corporate tax collection. Second point. Now this is, there are hardly 4.5 lakh people in the entire country who have declared that they are earning more than 50 lakh rupees. Just 4.5 lakh. Now I'll tell you some data. If you look at the number of cars sold last year, it was around 40 lakhs, 4.2 million, 40 lakhs. 50% of these cars are SUVs. They're pretty, 15 lakh plus. So about 20 lakh plus cars sold last year only were SUVs. There were 5 lakh flats sold. And I was remembering there was an article, DLF, I think few months back had launched an ultra luxury project in Gurgaon. I think 7 or 10 crore plus each property. about 1,200 flats. They were sold in 2-3 days. So are we saying
Well,
that only 4.5 lakh people are the ones who are buying these flats, these cars, and all these ultra luxury properties? Something So the point I'm trying to say is there is lot of. I mean, the data shows that the underreporting is happening for sure. I mean, we have seen. I mean, all of us stay in cities like Delhi, Bombay, even tier two cities, like Kanpur, Meerut. I mean, 4.5 lakh people across the country earning 50 lakh is a number which is not easy to digest. So I think the single most, reform I would say for the government, and it's not that I am telling you, government knows it. Obviously, government knows. Prime Minister has himself alluded to it quite a few times. I think one thing that the government should do to alleviate the stress on middle class is to expand the tax net. So there are people, there could be professionals. I do not know. I'm not competent to kind of state who are the people, but for sure there are people who are earning and they're not declaring. Legitimately they're not declaring. So underreporting is happening. I think if the government is able to bridge that and bring more people into the tax net, the problem of the middle class or the salaried class will get automatically solved. So I think that's the limited point I want, and I understand, for the government, from the perspective of government, you have to invest also, and there are limited sources from which you can make. So even government hands are tied. So I think the only solution is somehow to get those people who are earning but are not paying their taxes in an honest and a transparent way to get them into the tax net.
so Modi government has in the last 10 years taken many decisions which are very bold and sometimes, at least in the short term, not very popular, but eventually he took the decisions in the interest of the country. I'm sure in this income tax review that the government has initiated, I'm sure some very important decisions will be taken at the same time. Uh, Before I end it, I just want one observation from you. I always believe that corporate tax has to be reasonably at par with the global benchmarks, because otherwise foreign investment will not come, and eventually corporates not only create direct jobs but also create a lot of indirect jobs to the ancillaries. So to that extent, reducing the corporate tax was important to, especially because a lot of companies were looking for a China plus one strategy to ensure that they come here, which was important. But I'm sure for the middle class also, the government will take some important decisions which will make them happy eventually. On that note, Kishore thank you so much, because it is always an enlightening occasion when I talk to you. There's so much to learn from you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to more conversations like this with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you so much. See you. Bye.